The cold was a living, breathing entity in the northern penal colony, a monstrous thing that gnawed at bones and stole the breath from lungs. Ilara stood shivering, a solitary figure against a vast, unforgiving landscape of white, her heart a shriveled, frozen thing in her chest. Before her, a rough-hewn wooden post was driven into the permafrost. This was where her son Leo had been tied and executed by a firing squad at dawn. His crime? A brutal act of hooliganism he did not commit. He had taken the blame to protect another, a foolish, noble act that had cost him everything. The authorities, eager to close the case, had accepted the confession without question. Her husband, Marcus Thorne, the esteemed regimental commander of the 42nd Northern Division, had done nothing to stop it. Now, clutching a small, cold urn containing all that was left of her bright, smiling boy, Ilara felt a hollowness so profound it threatened to swallow her whole. The journey to the military district had been long and arduous, a punishing trek for a woman whose spirit was already shattered. But a desperate, maternal fire still. The cold here doesn't feel like winter. Feels like the end of the world. It bites through my thin coat, through my skin, right down to the marrow of my bones, and it carries a sound, the ghost of a rifle crack that never seems to fade. I stand in this godforsaken place, this patch of hard, frozen earth where they left him, and I can't feel my feet. I can only feel the weight of the small, plain urn in my arms. His name was Leo. My son. My bright, beautiful boy with a laugh that could make the sun feel jealous. They said he was a hooligan. They said he committed a brutal assault in a town he'd never even visited. They said he confessed. I know he didn't do it. He told me so with his eyes, wide with a fear he was too brave to voice, in the single supervised minute they allowed me before they took him away for good. He took the blame for someone else. He was always too kind for his own good. And his father, Marcus Thorne, the great regimental commander, let it happen. My husband, the man I once loved, he didn't lift a finger. His letters, which had already grown sparse and cold, stopped altogether after my one desperate plea for him to intervene. So I came here. I carried my son's ashes through the frozen wasteland to the gates of the Northern Command Military District. I needed to look Marcus in the eye. I needed to shove this urn into his hands and make him see what his inaction had cost us. The sentries at the gate looked at me like I was something the wind had blown in, a piece of trash caught on their pristine fence. My face is raw from the cold and the tears that freeze before they can fall. My hands are chapped and bloody. I must look like a madwoman. Maybe I am. I need to see Commander Thorne, I said, my voice a raspy thing I barely recognized. Tell him his wife is here. The younger guard's eyes widened, but the older one just smirked. The commander's wife is inside, ma'am. Has been for months. You'd best move along. The world tilted. What are you talking about? I am his wife. Sure you are, the older guard sneered. And I'm the Tsar. Now scram before we arrest you for loitering. I begged. I pleaded. I showed them my identification, our faded marriage certificate I've carried next to my heart for 18 years. Meant nothing. They saw a ragged, hysterical peasant woman, not the wife of an officer. It was the sound of music that finally broke me. It drifted over the high walls of the compound, the lively, cheerful strains of a folk dance. Laughter followed. I saw the glow of lanterns against the darkening sky. A celebration. What is that? I whispered, my breath a white cloud of despair. The younger guard, looking almost apologetic, mumbled, "The commander's wedding banquet, ma'am." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I stumbled back, clutching Leo's urn so tightly I thought the ceramic might shatter. His wedding banquet. While the ashes of his son were still warm in my arms. A black car pulled up to the gate, its windows tinted. The guard snapped to attention. The rear window rolled down and there he was. Marcus. He looked older, his face harder, his uniform impeccable. He didn't look like the young soldier who had vowed to love me forever. He looked like a stranger. And beside him, beaming with a victorious glow, was a woman I knew all too well. Clara. The widow of Marcus's comrade, a battlefield nurse who had cared for him after a skirmish last year. I'd welcomed her into our home, treated her like a sister. She'd been so weak, so grateful. Her eyes met mine through the window. There was no surprise in them. Only a cold, smug satisfaction. Then the window rolled up and the car drove through the gates, leaving me in the freezing dust. I don't know how long I stood there. The cold seeped into my soul. The music from the party felt like a mockery of my entire life. Leo was dead. Marcus had replaced me. I had nothing. Nothing but the ashes in my arms and a rage so deep and cold it made the Arctic wind feel like a summer breeze. Somehow my feet carried me away. I found myself at the tiny, neglected cemetery where they'd allowed me to bury an empty coffin, a place for me to mourn. I fell to my knees before the patch of raw earth that marked Leo's empty grave. "I'm so sorry, my boy," I sobbed, my tears freezing on my cheeks. "I'm so sorry I couldn't save you. I'm so sorry your father is a monster." I held the urn to my chest, rocking back and forth. The injustice of it all was a fire in my veins. Leo was gone. And the boy he had protected, Clara's son Cale, was alive. He was probably at that very banquet, laughing, enjoying his life, his future wide open, while my son was reduced to a pot of ashes. A resolve, sharp and deadly, began to form within me. I would not let this stand. I would force Marcus to see. I would make him acknowledge his son, if nothing else. The next day I went back. I bypassed the main gate and found a side entrance used by supply trucks. I waited for hours, my body numb, until I saw him walking from the headquarters to his residence, a handsome 2-story house with smoke curling from the chimney. "Marcus!" I screamed, rushing toward him. He turned, and his face contorted in shock and immediate annoyance. "Alara, what in God's name are you doing here? How did you get past the... You let him die?" I shrieked, thrusting the urn toward him. "Your son. Your own flesh and blood. He was innocent and you let them shoot him." He grabbed my arm, his grip painfully tight, and dragged me away from the main path, behind a barren row of shrubs. "Keep your voice down. Are you insane? I am a mother who has lost her child. What is your excuse?" He released my arm as if I'd burned him, his eyes darting around to see if anyone had heard. It was a tragic affair. The law ran its course. There was nothing I could do. "Nothing you could do?" I laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You are the regimental commander. You could have stopped it with a word. But you didn't. You were too busy playing house with Clara. Was it her? Did she ask you to let my son die in place of hers?" His face went pale. He didn't need to answer. The guilt flashing in his eyes was confirmation enough. "He's already dead, Alara," he said, his voice low and harsh, all pretense of sympathy gone. "It's a fact that can't be changed. If you keep this quiet, Clara and I are willing to give you 100 rubles as compensation. I can't ruin Cale's future over someone who's already gone. 100 rubles. The price of our son's life." I looked at this man, this stranger in my husband's skin, and I felt the last flicker of hope inside me die. There was no justice to be found here. There was only corruption and selfishness so profound it stole the air from my lungs. I turned away from him. I didn't say another word. I walked back to Leo's grave, the urn held tightly to my chest. The world had no place for me. Justice was a fairy tale for fools. I sat by his grave until the sun began to set, painting the snow in shades of blood and fire. From my pocket, I took out the small, bitter vial I'd gotten from an apothecary weeks ago, when the despair had first begun to swallow me. I hadn't had the courage to use it then. I did now. "I'm coming, Leo," I whispered. "Wait for me." I drank it in one swift, burning gulp. The pain was immediate and acute, but it was nothing compared to the pain in my heart. As my vision darkened and the cold finally ceased to matter, I made a vow to the uncaring sky. If there is a next life, if there is any justice in this universe or the next, I will have mine. The first thing I felt was warmth. Then the smell of baking bread. My eyes flew open. I was lying in my own bed in our small rustic house on the outskirts of the village. Morning sunlight streamed through the window. A familiar, beloved voice called from the kitchen. "Mom, are you up?" I made breakfast. I sat bolt upright, my heart hammering against my ribs. That voice. It was impossible. I looked at my hands. They were smooth, uncalloused. I touched my face. No lines of grief were carved there. I stumbled out of bed and into the main room. And there he was. Leo. My son. Alive. Whistling as he scooped fried eggs onto 2 plates. He was wearing his favorite blue sweater. "Leo." My voice was a strangled whisper. He turned, his face bright and smiling. "Hey, sleepyhead. You were really out cold. Big day today, remember?" I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. This was a dream. A A cruel, beautiful dream my dying mind had conjured. What day is it? I managed to ask. He looked at me funny. It's Tuesday, Mom. The day before the university entrance exams? Don't tell me you forgot. You've been drilling me on math all week. The day before the exams. The day before the police would come. The day before Kale would get into a fight and put a boy in the hospital. The day before Leo would be persuaded to take the blame. I had not just come back to life. I had come back in time. I stared at my son, at the life glowing in his eyes, and the frozen rage in my soul thawed, replaced by a ferocious, all-consuming protectiveness. The vow I made at my grave had been heard. This time I would not fail him. I remember, I said, my voice suddenly strong and clear. I walked over and pulled him into a crushing hug, breathing in the scent of him, alive and warm. I remember everything. I had a day. One day to change everything. And I would not waste a single second of it. I held Leo for a moment longer, memorizing the solid living feel of him. The scent of pine soap and fresh air in his hair was a miracle. The memory of cold ceramic in my arms was a ghost I could still feel, a phantom limb of agony. I pushed it down. There was no room for that pain now. Only for action. Mom? You okay? Leo asked, pulling back slightly, his brow furrowed with concern. You're squeezing kinda tight. I forced a smile, releasing him and cupping his face. I'm perfect. I just had a bad dream. That's all. The understatement of several lifetimes. Now eat your eggs. We have a lot to do today. He shrugged, used to my occasional intensity, and dug into his food. My mind was racing, a whirlwind of plans and contingencies. The first and most immediate threat. The police would arrive tomorrow morning, accusing Leo of a crime committed miles away by Kale. Marcus's influence would see the accusations stick with terrifying speed. I couldn't just hide him. That would make him look guilty. I had to preempt the entire situation. I had to build a fortress of legitimacy around him so strong that no accusation could touch him. Leo, listen to me, I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. He looked up, a piece of egg halfway to his mouth, surprised by my severity. Forget your exams. What? Mom, I've been studying for. I know. But there's something more important. The National Seed Program. Applications close at noon today. It was a prestigious, government-sponsored initiative that identified and nurtured talented youth for critical fields: engineering, sciences, leadership. Acceptance came with immediate benefits, including a provisional security clearance that placed participants under state protection. It was a status symbol and a shield. In my past life, I'd thought it was beyond our reach. Now I saw it as our only lifeline. His eyes widened. The seed program? Mom, that's for geniuses and people with connections. My grades are good, but they're not that good. You are that good, I said fiercely. And we have a connection. I walked to the old carved trunk at the foot of my bed, the one that held my most precious things. I lifted the lid, pushing aside linens and memories until my fingers brushed against cold, polished metal. My father's service medal. A heavy bronze star hanging from a ribbon of faded green and red. He'd earned it in a conflict he never talked about, saving his entire unit at the cost of his own health. He was a humble man who'd refused a military pension, choosing to return to his land. On his deathbed, he made me promise never to use his honor to ask for favors. A medal is for remembering, not for bargaining, Elara, he'd whispered. I closed my eyes, asking his forgiveness. I'm not bargaining for a favor, Papa. I'm bargaining for your grandson's life. What's that? Leo asked, coming to stand beside me. Your grandfather's courage, I said, closing my hand around it. And today it's going to be our key. Get dressed. Your best clothes. We're going to the administrative office. The application process was a blur of frantic activity. I used the medal not as a bribe, but as a testament to our family's character, our loyalty. I spoke of Leo's potential, his integrity, our family's service. I was no longer the timid rural wife. I was a force of nature, my grief from another life channeled into a relentless, persuasive energy. The official, a harried-looking man with ink-stained fingers, was initially dismissive until I placed the medal on his desk and told him, my voice low and steady, the story of how it was earned. My son comes from a line of men who do the right thing no matter the cost, I said. The seed program needs young men like that. Perhaps it was the conviction in my eyes or the weight of the metal, but he processed the application. The final step was the political vetting certificate, a background check that usually took weeks. I stood my ground, refusing to leave until a provisional approval was stamped on the forms. I cited the urgency of the program's deadline. I implied, without ever saying it, that my husband, the commander, would be expecting it. The lie tasted like ash, but it worked. By midday we walked out, Leo holding a folder that declared him a candidate of the National Seed Program. He looked dazed. I can't believe that just happened. Believe it, I said, my arm linked through his. This is just the beginning. The shield was in place. Now it was time to go on the offensive. Instead of going home, I led us to the town's modest bus station. Where are we going now? Leo asked, bewildered. To see a journalist, I said, my gaze fixed on the horizon. A man named Petrov. He writes for the regional paper. He likes stories about corruption. The bus ride was quiet. Leo sensed my grim focus and stayed silent, occasionally glancing at me with a new, unfamiliar respect. I spent the time rehearsing what I would say, weaving the truth into a story too scandalous for any editor to ignore. Petrov worked out of a small, cluttered office that smelled of stale coffee and cheap tobacco. He was a rumpled man with keen, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. "What can I do for you, madam?" he asked, not unkindly. I didn't mince words. "My name is Alara Thorne. My husband is Regimental Commander Marcus Thorne of the Northern Command." I let that hang in the air for a moment. He is currently maintaining 2 separate households using military housing and resources. Myself and my son in our village home, and another woman, Clara, and her son within the military district itself. He is bigamous and he is misusing state funds. Petrov's pen, which had been doodling on a notepad, went still. His eyes sharpened. "Those are very serious allegations. Do you have proof?" "The proof is in the military district's housing logs. Check who is assigned to Residence 42 on Officers' Row. Then check who receives his secondary allowance at a post office box in my village. He thinks he's clever. He's not." I leaned forward. "This isn't just about a broken marriage, Mr. Petrov. This is about the moral character of the men who lead our military. It's about the reputation of the entire district." I saw the spark in his eyes. This was more than a gossip column. This was a front-page scandal. He asked a few more pointed questions, which I answered with cold, precise detail. I gave him everything except the reason for my timing. Let him think I was a scorned wife. It was a narrative he would understand. We left his office as the sun was beginning to set. The die was cast. The next morning I was awake before dawn. I watched the road, my heart a steady drumbeat in my chest. Leo, confused by my vigilance, ate his breakfast nervously. "Mom, what's going on? You've been acting strange for 2 days." Before I could answer, we saw it. A black car speeding down our road, kicking up a plume of dust. It didn't belong here. It was from the city. From the military district. It screeched to a halt in front of our house. The door flew open and Marcus erupted from it. His face was a thundercloud of rage. He stormed up the path and, without a word of greeting, backhanded me across the face. The crack echoed in the morning quiet. Pain, bright and sharp, exploded across my cheekbone. "You ignorant hick," he roared. "Do you have any idea what you've done? That story is everywhere. My career. My future." I tasted blood on my lip. I didn't cry out. I just slowly turned my head back to look at him, my eyes narrowed. In my previous life I had knelt in the snow for 3 days begging for a glimpse of him. Now he had come to me in less than a day. But I wasn't the only one who reacted. Leo, who had frozen in shock at the sudden violence, let out a furious cry. He grabbed a thick piece of firewood from the stack by the door and stepped between Marcus and me, brandishing it like a weapon, his young face contorted with a protective fury I had never seen before. "Don't you touch her," he yelled, his voice cracking with emotion. The scene held there, tense and electric. The enraged father, the defiant son, and me, the mother with a second chance, wiping blood from my mouth. And then another car pulled up. Clara emerged, her face a perfect mask of concern. She hurried over, placing a hand on Marcus's arm. "Marcus, darling, calm down. This is no way to handle things." She turned her pitiful gaze to me. "Alara, sister, this is all my fault. If you want to blame someone, blame me. My Marcus is innocent." Please, won't you forgive him? Her performance was impeccable. But I saw the gleam of satisfaction in her eyes. She was enjoying this. I ignored her completely. I kept my eyes locked on Marcus, my voice low and dangerously calm. Yesterday the police came to our house. They tried to arrest Leo for hooliganism. For a crime committed in the city. Did that have anything to do with you? The change in their faces was instantaneous. The rage on Marcus's face flickered, replaced by a flash of pure, unadulterated panic. Clara's carefully constructed mask of concern slipped, revealing sheer shock. They had been so discreet. They thought their plan was airtight. Their silence was all the confirmation I needed. He's your own son, I whispered, the words dripping with a venom I didn't know I possessed. Even wild animals don't harm their young. How could you be this heartless? My repeated questioning in front of Clara and a now horrified Leo pushed Marcus over the edge. Annoyed, cornered, and losing face, he shouted the truth into the quiet morning air. He's not as good a student as Cale. So what if he takes the blame for him? What do you want me to do? Watch Cale's future die? Besides, nothing even happened to him. What more do you want? The world stopped. There was the confession. Not just of the cover-up, but of the value he placed on our son's life. So what if he takes the blame? Leo's face went ashen. The piece of firewood slipped from his fingers and thudded to the ground. I looked at my husband, this man who had easily condemned his child to death, and I felt nothing. No love, no hate. Just a cold, vast emptiness. It reminded me of his excuses from my past life. How he told me Claire's husband had died a hero. How she was a battlefield nurse who had cared for him and they had fallen in love. How she was pregnant with his fallen comrade's child, a sacred trust. I had believed him. I'd treated her like a sister. I was the one who carried her to the hospital when she gave birth. I made her every meal during her confinement. When she was too weak to produce milk, it was my breast that fed Cale. I had raised him. And my one act of kindness had ultimately cost my own son his life. Marcus, realizing what he'd just admitted, looked from my icy expression to Leo's shattered one. He opened his mouth, perhaps to try and backtrack to explain. But he never got the chance. From inside the house we heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a sharp, tearing sound, followed by a panicked, anguished cry from Leo. No. We all turned. Leo sprinted inside and I was right behind him. There in the main room stood Cale. He had his hands casually stuffed in his pockets, whistling a tuneless melody. And on the floor at his feet was Leo's seed program application folder. The contents were spilled out, and the precious, hard-won certificate of provisional acceptance was torn neatly in half. Leo was on his knees, desperately trying to piece the document together, his hands shaking. No, no, no. Cale looked down at him, a smirk playing on his lips. He didn't have a care in the world. And standing in the doorway, Marcus found a new target for his fury. He pointed a shaking finger at the torn paper. So this is where it went, he snarled, his voice dripping with contempt. No wonder I couldn't find it in the system. You went behind my back. You enrolled him without my permission? I decide his future, not you. I looked from my husband's enraged face to Cale's smug one, to my son's despair as he knelt amidst the ruins of his hope. The shield I had worked so desperately to build had been shattered in an instant. And the war was just beginning. The world narrowed to the torn paper on the floor and the smug, whistling boy who had destroyed it. Rage, cold and sharper than any knife, flooded my veins. This was no mere prank. This was a deliberate act of sabotage, an attack on the future I had fought so desperately to secure. Before I could move, before I could speak, Marcus's voice crashed over us again, his anger now a weapon aimed directly at me. You went behind my back, he repeated, his voice a low, dangerous growl. You think you can make these decisions? That paper means nothing without my final approval. I am his father. I am the head of this family. His future is mine to grant or mine to deny. He was trying to reassert control, to dominate the narrative as he always had. But the rules had changed. I had changed. I ignored him. My focus was entirely on Cale. I crossed the room in 3 swift strides. The smug smirk didn't leave his face until my open hand connected with his cheek with a crack that silenced his whistling and echoed in the small room. The force of the blow snapped his head to the side. He stared at me, his eyes wide with shock, then narrowing into slits of pure, venomous malice. A red handprint bloomed on his pale skin. "You're a high school student," I said, my voice trembling not with fear but with contained fury. "Don't pretend you don't understand the consequences of this. Why would you do something so cruel? So destructive?" Clara shrieked, rushing forward to cup Cale's face. "How dare you? You vicious woman. Look what you've done to his face." Cale shoved her hand away, his eyes locked on me. "Yeah, I know what'll happen," he spat, his voice dripping with a hatred that seemed far too old for him. "It just means he won't be able to go to college or join that stupid program anymore." "So what?" He shrugged, a gesture of such profound indifference that it stole my breath. "He was never going to make it anyway. So what?" The same words his father had used minutes before. The apple didn't fall far from the tree. "If your parents can't teach you how to be a decent human being," I said, my voice low and deadly, "then I will." I raised my hand to strike him again. I never got the chance. Marcus moved with the brutal efficiency of a soldier. He didn't come for me. He went for Leo. He grabbed our son's arm, the one desperately clutching the torn pieces of paper, and twisted it violently. A sickening, wet pop echoed in the room, followed by Leo's choked cry of agony. Marcus didn't stop there. He used his grip on Leo's dislocated arm to hurl him across the room. My boy stumbled off balance and in blinding pain and fell backwards. Right onto the low, cast-iron brazier we used to heat the main room. The glowing coals scattered, and for a horrifying second, Leo was sprawled amidst the fire. He screamed. A raw, primal sound of agony that I will hear until the day I die. I was at his side in an instant, beating at the smoldering fabric of his shirt, rolling him off the coals. The smell of burnt wool and seared flesh filled the air. On his back, through the torn cloth, angry red blisters were already rising on a patch of waxy white skin. Marcus stood over us, his chest heaving, his face a mask of cold fury. "Elara," he snarled. "Don't mistake my kindness for weakness. Everything in this house belongs to me, including that boy's life. If I want to take it back, I don't need your permission." He looked from my horrified face to Leo's pain-twisted one. "If you had been smarter, I might have let you stay as the main wife. But clearly you can't get along with Clara and Cale. Since that's the case, you can stay here in the countryside and reflect on yourself. When you've figured out your place, maybe then I'll consider giving you a proper title." His words were so twisted, so utterly devoid of humanity that I felt nothing. No anger, no grief. Just a cold, numb void. My only thought, my only purpose was Leo. I didn't look at Marcus. I didn't look at Clara or Cale. I gathered my son into my arms, ignoring the shooting pain in my own back as I lifted him. He whimpered, his face buried in my neck, his body shaking with shock and pain. "It's okay, my love," I whispered, my voice surprisingly steady. "Mom's here. I'm taking you to the hospital." I carried him out of that house of horrors, leaving them behind. I didn't have a car. I half-carried, half-dragged my son the 2 miles to the village clinic, my breath coming in ragged sobs, my own tears mixing with the sweat on my brow. The doctor at the small clinic took one look at Leo's back and his face turned grim. "This is bad," he muttered, immediately calling for a nurse. They rushed him into a treatment room, leaving me standing in the hallway, my arms feeling empty and useless, my hands stained with soot and my son's blood. The wait was an eternity. When the doctor finally emerged, his expression was stern. "The burns are deep. If they had been any worse, we would have had to talk about skin grafts. He's sedated now. The pain will be severe for a long time." He looked at me, a question in his eyes that I couldn't answer. "How did this happen?" "An accident," I whispered, the lie ash in my mouth. "A terrible accident." He didn't believe me, but he didn't press. In a village like this, everyone knew who Marcus Thorne was. Nobody asked too many questions. When I was allowed to see him, Leo was lying on his stomach, his back swathed in bandages. His face was pale, his eyes glassy with medication, but he tried to smile when he saw me. "Mom," he slurred. "Don't cry. It doesn't really hurt that much." The braveness of the lie shattered me. I knelt by his bed, taking his unhurt hand in mine. "I'm the one who made you fight with Dad," he whispered, his eyes welling with tears he was too proud to shed. "It's all my fault. I won't argue anymore. I'm willing to go apologize to Cale. If it'll make Dad stop being so cold to you." His words, his willingness to sacrifice his own pride and safety for a shred of paternal approval that would never come, sent a wave of such profound sorrow through me that I thought my heart would stop. He still saw himself as the problem. He still didn't know that in another life his own father had traded his life for a political favor. I remembered the last time I saw him in that other life. In the cold visiting room before his execution. He'd gripped my hand so tightly his knuckles were white. "Mom," he'd asked, his voice hollow, "why hasn't Dad come to see me even once? Don't worry about me anymore. Live your life well. I'll repay you in my next life." As I listened to him now, trying so hard to comfort me, I wrapped my arms gently around his shoulders, avoiding his wounds, and let the tears come. Silent, racking sobs for the boy I had lost and the boy I was fighting to save. "Ethan," I whispered, using the name I'd called him when he was very small. "Don't be afraid. Mom is here. And I will make sure you get the justice you deserve. I promise." Later that evening, when he was stable, we left the clinic. We had no money for a longer stay. The walk home was slow and silent, Leo leaning heavily on me, each step a fresh agony for him. We arrived at our door to find it locked. The cold wind, which had held a brief respite during the day, was now picking up again, cutting through our thin clothes. I fumbled for my key, but it wouldn't turn. The lock had been changed. A cold dread, deeper than the winter chill, settled in my stomach. I banged on the door. "Marcus, open the door. Leo is hurt. He needs to be inside." There was no answer. Only the howl of the wind. I pounded harder, my fist growing sore. "Please. He has a fever. He can't handle the cold." Suddenly a light flicked on inside. A surge of relief went through me. He was there. He would let us in. He had to. But the sound that came from within the house wasn't the sound of a lock turning. It was the sound of a woman's breathy moan, followed by a low, familiar laugh. "Babe, stop," Clara's voice floated through the door, laced with fake concern. "Someone's outside." "So what?" Marcus's voice replied, thick with amusement and something else. "Let them listen. It'll teach them a lesson. Now come here. Give me a kiss." The obscene sounds of their lovemaking began, loud and deliberate, a cruel performance meant for an audience of two, a betrayed wife and a wounded son shivering in the cold. I stood there, frozen, listening to the panting and moaning that came in waves from inside our home. Inside my home. The home I had kept for him for 18 years while he was away. The home where I had raised his son. While outside, that son was burning with fever, his body racked with shivers, his back a map of his father's brutality. The despair was absolute. It was a black hole sucking all the light and warmth from the world. All I could do was take off my own thin cotton coat and wrap it tightly around Leo, who was slumped against the doorframe, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow. Snow began to fall, soft and silent, covering the world in a blanket of white. It settled on my hair, on Leo's shoulders, on the ground around us. The door never opened. The sounds from inside eventually faded, replaced by the soft, rhythmic sound of snoring. We had no money. No place to go. In the village, no one would dare take us in for fear of Marcus's wrath. We were utterly alone. I held my son through the long, frozen night, my body curled around his to shield him from the worst of the wind, my own teeth chattering uncontrollably. I prayed for the dawn. When it finally came, the door creaked open. Rachel stood there, wrapped in one of my good robes, her face flushed with sleep and satisfaction. She feigned surprise, her hand flying to her mouth in a perfect pantomime of shock. "Oh, Jenny, when did you get here?" she asked, her voice sickly sweet. "Why didn't you knock? My Marcus kept me up all night. I didn't hear a thing." The mockery in her eyes was plain. I didn't have the energy to respond to her taunts. Leo was barely conscious. I helped him inside, ignoring her, and laid him down on the cold floor by the dead fireplace. His skin was on fire. I needed money. No. I rushed to the old wooden chest in the corner where I kept my life savings. The small lock was broken. I threw open the lid. It was empty. The tin box where I had saved every spare ruble for years, the money meant for Leo's college, was gone. Every last coin. The room spun. I gripped the chest for support. "Looking for something?" Clara asked calmly from the doorway, a smug smile playing on her lips. "Where is my money?" My voice was a dry rasp. "Marcus was gone for years," she said, inspecting her nails. "It was the neighbors who helped keep this house running. That money, we used it to thank them for their kindness." She shot me a look of pure disdain. You're really that stingy, huh? Still thinking about that little bit of cash? Honestly, acting so petty. No wonder people look down on you. Her words made my head spin. That money was earned acre by acre, selling grain bit by bit. It was hope. It was a future. And now it was gone, stolen by the woman sleeping in my bed. I wanted to scream. I wanted to claw her eyes out. But I forced myself to take a deep, shuddering breath. Panic would not help Leo. I had one last card to play. One last, desperate hope. I turned away from her and walked to the closet. I moved aside our few hanging clothes and felt along the back panel until my fingers found the hidden catch my father had built decades ago. A small, secret compartment. I held my breath and opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were my father's military medals. Not just the one I had used, but all of them. Gleaming bronze stars, ribbons of courage, medals of honor earned in battles he never spoke of. They were our family's greatest treasure. And my last, best hope for justice. On his deathbed, he made me promise never to use them to trouble the organization. But he had also taught me to protect my family no matter the cost. I was keeping that promise now. I carefully packed the medals into a cloth bag. Then I went to my own small jewelry box. Inside was the only thing of value my mother had left me. A simple silver locket with a tiny picture of her inside. I had never once considered selling it. I sold it that afternoon. The money was barely enough for train tickets and a few days of food, but it was enough. Once Leo's fever broke, once he was strong enough to travel, I told him my plan. We're going to the military district, I said, my voice firm. And we're not going to beg your father. We're going to see his superiors. Leo looked at me, his eyes still shadowed with pain and betrayal, but now with a flicker of something else. A spark of hope. Or maybe just a determination to survive. We boarded the train the next day, leaving the village and the life we had known behind. I clutched the bag of medals in my lap like a talisman. This time I would not be a supplicant. I would be a claimant. And I would not leave until I had what we came for. Justice. The train ride was a nightmare of jolting metal and anxious silence. Leo slept fitfully, his head on my shoulder, his face pale even in sleep. Each lurch of the carriage made him wince, a silent testament to the pain radiating from his burned back. I didn't sleep. I watched the frozen landscape blur past, my father's medals a heavy, cold weight in the bag on my lap. They felt like his bones. They felt like my promise. We arrived at the military district station as a weak dawn bled into the sky. The place was a fortress of order and authority, a stark contrast to our ragged, travel-worn selves. People in crisp uniforms shot us suspicious glances. We didn't belong here. I led Leo, leaning heavily on me, towards the main gate of the base itself. It was even more imposing up close. High fences, barbed wire, and stern-faced sentries who looked through us rather than at us. I need to speak with Commander Thorne's superior officer, I said to the guard at the gate post, my voice hoarse from cold and lack of sleep. He looked me up and down, his expression a mask of bored disdain. He saw a peasant woman in a patched coat, her face lined with hardship, supporting a sickly-looking boy. He didn't see a wife. He didn't see a mother. He certainly didn't see a person worthy of respect. Where'd you crawl out from? Some backwater swamp? He sneered, not even bothering to stand up straight. Who do you think you are? Asking to see our commander's boss. You're not here to beg for money, are you? The familiarity of the ridicule was a punch to the gut. In my past life, this same scorn had broken me. I had shown them my marriage certificate, I had pleaded, I had named myself as Marcus's wife, and it had only made them laugh harder. Clara was the commander's wife here. I was just a crazy woman from the sticks. This time I did not plead. I did not name myself. I looked the guard dead in the eye, my gaze flat and cold. Then slowly, deliberately, I knelt on the frozen ground. I ignored the sharp bite of the cold through my thin skirt. I unknotted the cloth bag and began to lay its contents on the ground in front of me, on the coat I had spread like a sacred cloth. One by one, I placed my father's medals on the faded wool. The bronze stars, dulled by time but not by honor. The ribbons, their colors faded but their meaning eternal. The medals of valor, of sacrifice. They gleamed dully against the rough fabric. The guard's sneer faltered. His eyes widened as he recognized what they were. These weren't trinkets. These were a history, a legacy. His face went pale. I looked up at him, my voice quiet but clear. cutting through the morning air like a shard of ice. "Do I qualify to see Commander Thorne's superior now?" he stammered, suddenly falling over himself. Please wait here, ma'am." He scrambled into the guard post and grabbed the phone, his voice a low, urgent mumble. It wasn't long before a jeep screeched to a halt inside the gate. Several elderly men emerged, their postures ramrod straight despite their age, their olive-green uniforms adorned with rows of their own service ribbons. Their hair was silver, their faces etched with the maps of long campaigns. The man in the lead had eyes that missed nothing. They walked towards us, their boots crunching on the gravel. Their gazes swept over me, over Leo shivering beside me, and then down to the medals arranged on the ground. The lead official's breath caught in his throat. He looked from the medals to my face and I saw a dawning recognition, a shock of memory. He knelt not to me but to the medals, his fingers gently brushing one of the bronze stars. "The Order of the Red Banner," he whispered. He looked up at me, his eyes sharp. "I served with the man who earned this. Your father, Armin Vogel." I hadn't said a word. He knew him. He knew my papa. Tears I had been holding back for a lifetime finally broke free. I didn't sob, I wept silently, the tears carving hot paths through the grime on my cheeks. I clutched the medals to my chest and dropped my head, my body shaking with the force of a grief and relief so profound it was physical. The man reached out immediately, his hand gentle on my arm. "Daughter," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Child of a decorated hero. Get up off this cold ground. Please." He helped me to my feet. His eyes took in my tattered clothes, the obvious frostbite on my bare hands, the desperate fear in my eyes. Then his gaze fell on Leo, who was trying so hard to stand tall despite his pain, his young face a mirror of my own determination and suffering. The official straightened up, his expression transforming from one of pity to one of solemn duty. He looked me in the eye. "Comrade Vogel," he said, using my maiden name with a respect that made my knees weak. "Whatever injustice you've suffered, tell me everything. I will see that you get justice." Those words. Those long-lost, impossible words. I broke down completely then, sobbing uncontrollably. But between the tears the story poured out. I told them everything. I told them of Marcus's long absences, the stopped allowances, the 2 households. I told them of the police coming for Leo, of Marcus's confession in the yard. So what if he takes the blame? I told them of Cale tearing the application, of Marcus dislocating Leo's arm, of the brazier, of the locked door and the sounds of lovemaking while my son burned with fever in the snow. The officials listened, their faces growing grimmer with each revelation. When I told them how Marcus had sacrificed his own son's future for his stepson, one of the leaders, a gruff man with a thunderous brow, couldn't hold back. He slammed his fist against the side of the jeep. "What a beast!" he roared, his voice echoing in the compound. But I wasn't done. I had to show them the cost. The physical proof. I rolled up my pant leg, revealing my deformed shin bone, the ugly, twisted result of the injury I'd sustained years ago carrying a presumed dead Marcus from a pile of rubble after an attack. The bone had set wrong and decades of hard labor had made it a grotesque, painful knot of tissue and bone. "I carried him," I said simply. "And this is what it cost me." Then I gently lifted Leo's shirt. The bandages were still there, but around them were older scars. The map of a childhood spent fighting village thugs who thought the commander's abandoned family was easy prey. The lead official looked at us, at the evidence of a life of quiet desperation and loud brutality etched onto our bodies. His eyes filled with tears he didn't bother to hide. He wiped them away with a brusque hand and gently held my own calloused one. "Comrade Vogel," he said, his voice warm with a fatherly firmness. "The organization understands your suffering now. Whatever you need, speak freely. We'll stand behind you." I drew myself up to my full height. The words were simple, but they had the weight of a lifetime behind them. "I want the organization to thoroughly investigate Marcus Thorne and Cale Volkov for their crimes. They must face the law. And I want a divorce." No sooner had the words left my mouth than a familiar voice thundered across the compound. "What nonsense are you spewing, Marcus?" He had heard the news and rushed over, his face a thundercloud of panic and rage. He stormed towards us, his hand raised, clearly intending to strike me, to shut me up as he always had. He never made it. The official in plain clothes moved with the speed of a much younger man. He didn't shout. He simply stepped forward and kicked Marcus's legs out from under him, sending him sprawling onto the gravel in an undignified heap. "Commander Thorne," the official barked, his voice like cracking ice. "In front of all these people, you dare raise a hand against a hero's daughter? What do you take us for? Props." Marcus lay on the ground, stunned, his uniform covered in dust. He looked from the furious officials to me, and his eyes widened in dawning, horrified disbelief. "You," he stammered, pushing himself up on his elbows. "You're the daughter of a decorated war hero? Armin Vogel was your father." I didn't respond with words. Instead, I lifted the military medals in my hands. Though the medal was old and pitted, it caught the weak morning sun and seemed to glow with its own fierce, unassailable light. One of my father's old comrades, a man with a chest full of his own medals, stepped forward with a cold scoff. He began to point to each one, his voice ringing out for all to hear. "This one," he said, pointing to a star, "was awarded during routine training. Her father lost an arm protecting a young soldier who stepped on a landmine." He moved his finger. "This one was from the Southern War, where he was injured while single-handedly blowing up an enemy ammunition dump. And this one," he added, his voice dropping to a reverent hush, "was given for holding a bridge against impossible odds, protecting a full retreat of civilians. He was the only survivor." Each account was heavier than the last. Each story a testament to a courage and self-sacrifice that stood in stark, damning contrast to the man groveling in the dirt. Marcus's face grew paler with every word, until he was the color of the ashes he had once offered me. He began to shake. He looked at me with bitter, furious regret, clearly blaming me for not revealing my background sooner. If he had known, he never would have chosen Clara. He could have leveraged my father's name for his own advancement. Clara, who had arrived and was watching from the periphery, was equally stunned. Her face, usually a perfect mask of gentle concern, was slack with shock. In her eyes, I had always been a simple, uneducated village woman who got lucky. If she had known my true identity, she would have set her sights on someone with even higher status, someone whose wife wasn't the daughter of a legend. But her social climbing ambitions were irrelevant now. The real problem was Kevin's crime, which could no longer be hidden. Seeing the tide turning irrevocably against them, she did what she did best. She tried to save her own skin. She threw herself to her knees in the gravel, bursting into theatrical tears. "Please," she wailed, clutching at the lead official's trousers. "You have to help me too. When I married Marcus, I didn't know he was still married to her. I was tricked. I was a victim. And when my son made a mistake, he wanted to turn himself in. It was Marcus. It was Marcus who convinced him to find a scapegoat. He was the one who insisted Leo should take the fall. My son is innocent. He's just a boy." Her performance was masterful. Her accusations landed like blows. Marcus stared at her as if she were a stranger, his mouth agape. It had been her idea to let Leo take the blame. She had been the one to push for it. Now she was throwing him under the bus with both hands. "You lying," Marcus began, but the official cut him off. Marcus looked frantically at the circle of stony faces. He raised his right hand in a panicked, desperate oath. "I swear on my honor as a soldier I never did anything wrong. Except the matter of keeping a second wife. That's all." "She's lying." Watching them tear each other apart like rabid dogs, a sound escaped me. It was a low, rusty laugh. I couldn't help it. This was just the beginning. In my past life, their family had built their happiness on the foundation of mine and Leo's pain. In this life, I would return every bit of that suffering, measure for measure. Hearing me laugh, Marcus seemed to catch a glimmer of hope. He turned to me, his eyes pleading, trying to find the soft-hearted woman he had once known. "Elara, please," he begged, crawling toward me. "We've been husband and wife for 18 years. Please explain to the leaders. I just lost my way for a moment. I promise I'll treat you and Leo well from now on. We can be a family again. A real family." But before I could even form a response, a word of cold rejection, Leo stepped forward. His face was pale, but his eyes burned with a clean, hot fire. He looked down at the father who had condemned him to death and spat on the ground at his feet. "You call us a family?" he snapped, his young voice strong and clear. "Growing up, I only ever had my mom. I never had a father. You're just the man who hurt her." I gently placed a hand on Leo's arm, a silent message of solidarity and pride. Then I turned back to the military officers. My stance is clear, I said, my voice ringing with finality. I want justice, not a reunion. Once I made myself clear, the machinery of military justice began to turn. A special investigative team was formed by the district to look into the case personally. Leo and I were placed in a small, clean apartment within the military family compound. A bitter irony being given sanctuary in the lion's den. Marcus, Clara, and Cale were all taken into separate custody. That same afternoon, a packet of papers was delivered to my door. I opened it with trembling hands. It was my divorce decree. I was free. From that moment on, I had nothing to do with Marcus Thorne ever again. I held the paper not with joy but with a profound, weary sense of closure. One battle was over. But the war for our future was just beginning. The apartment they gave us was small, sterile, and smelled of disinfectant and solitude. But it was warm. The radiators hissed comfortingly and the locks on the door worked from the inside. For the first time in weeks, I slept without fear, listening to Leo's steady breathing in the next bed. He slept deeply, the kind of sleep that only comes when the immediate threat is gone. The sleep of the safe. The next morning, an officer from the administrative branch visited, his manner respectful, almost deferential. He handed me a new file. The matter with your son's student records has been resolved, Comrade Vogel, he said. The torn certificate has been voided and a new one issued. His status with the National Seed Program is fully restored and protected. Leo took the folder, his hands trembling slightly. He looked from the official to me, his eyes wide. The shield was back, stronger than ever. It was no longer just paper. It was backed by the wrath of the entire military district. Thank you, I said, my voice firm. The officer nodded. The program director sends his personal apologies for the disruption. He awaits your son's arrival whenever he is fully recovered. After he left, Leo sat at the small kitchen table staring at the document. I don't have to go, you know, he said quietly, not looking at me. Now that everything's settled, I can just take the regular entrance exams. Stay closer to home. I knew what he was doing. He was still the boy who offered to apologize to Cale to keep the peace. He was worried about me, about the cost, about being a burden. I sat down opposite him. Look at me, Leo. He raised his eyes, so young and so old all at once. This is not about escaping what happened. This is about claiming what you deserve. Do you want to go? He was silent for a long moment and I saw the conflict in him. The fear of the unknown, the weight of the past, warring with the embers of his own crushed ambitions. Finally, he took a deep breath, and when he spoke, his voice was clearer and brighter than I had heard it in a long time. I've spent my whole life trapped in a village, Mom. I want to see more of this country. I want to be someone. If I go through the SEED program and then take the college exam, I'll have more choices later on. He met my gaze, his jaw set with a new determination. I want to make you proud. I want to become your strength. The words filled my chest with a painful, swelling pride. I reached across the table and took his hand. You have always been my strength. But yes, I'm so very proud. And you will go. The days of his recovery were a strange, quiet interlude. We were in the eye of the hurricane. The investigation churned on around us, but within our small apartment, we found a fragile peace. I cooked simple meals. We talked. Really talked. I told him stories about his grandfather, about the kind of man he was, the values he held. I didn't tell him about the other life. That was a burden for me alone to carry. But I told him enough so that he would understand where his own courage came from. Once he was strong enough, I took him to the train station. The platform was crowded with other young people heading to their own futures, their anxious parents fussing over them. Leo stood tall, his new duffel bag slung over his shoulder, the ghost of his injuries hidden beneath his clothes. You'll be okay? He asked me, his concern touching and heartbreaking. I will be more than okay, I assured him, smoothing the collar of his coat. I have a new job to start. After his train pulled away, steaming into the distance, I didn't allow myself to feel the emptiness. I walked directly to the publicity department of the military district. I asked to speak to the editor. The man behind the desk was skeptical at first. Another wife with a complaint. But then I told him my name. Alara Vogel. Daughter of Armin Vogel. The story of Marcus Thorne's two families was already a poorly kept secret, buzzing through the base, but I gave it shape. I gave it a heart. I didn't write it as a scorned woman's rant. I wrote it as a testament. I wrote about my father's service and his silence. I wrote about raising a son alone, about the hope represented by the SEED program. I wrote about the torn certificate, the dislocated arm, the burn, the locked door. I wrote about the medals on the cold ground. I wrote it all with a stark, unflinching honesty that was more powerful than any accusation. The editor read it, his face growing increasingly grave. When he finished, he looked up at me with new respect. "This will run," he said simply. "Tomorrow. Front page." And it did. The effect was instantaneous. My story was everywhere. It was discussed in mess halls, in offices, in family homes. I was recruited by the department on the spot, given a small desk and a typewriter. My title was editorial assistant, but my real job was to bear witness. I wrote follow-up articles about the values of military families, about the debt owed to the legacy of veterans, about the importance of protecting the vulnerable. When I went to the commissary to buy groceries, I heard women pointing me out, not with pity but with a fierce, protective pride. I heard them scolding their children, using Marcus and Clara as a cautionary tale. "Did you read about that scumbag couple? You better grow up honest or I'll take care of you myself." The school on base, under intense public pressure, launched its own investigation into Cale. What they uncovered was a pattern of bullying and extortion that shocked even the most hardened administrators. He had used his father's rank like a club, terrorizing classmates, especially those from less powerful families. He'd stolen money, beaten those who wouldn't pay, and harassed any girl who caught his eye. The final straw was the victim the investigation uncovered, the son of a soldier who had died in action. The boy had been blackmailed and physically assaulted for months, too afraid of retribution to speak up. His mother, a widow living in quiet grief, had remained silent, crushed by the same fear. After reading my article, she found her courage. She took her son and her husband's posthumous Medal of Honor, and she knelt in protest at the gates of the military base, just as I had. Her act was the spark that lit the tinderbox of public outrage. The story was no longer just about a corrupt commander and a failed marriage. It was about the sons of heroes being preyed upon by the sons of cowards. The pressure on the investigation became immense. Weeks turned into a month. The silence from the investigators was deafening. Then one afternoon, the same officer who had brought Leo's new file arrived at my apartment. He held a thick dossier. "The investigation is complete," he said, his expression unreadable. "The verdicts have been reached." He laid it out for me. Cale, due to the overwhelming evidence of hooliganism, blackmail, and bribing a scapegoat, had been convicted. Because he was still a minor, he was sentenced to a juvenile detention center until his 18th birthday. Clara was convicted of sabotaging a military marriage and being an accessory to the framing of an innocent. She received a 5-year prison sentence. I braced myself for Marcus's sentence. I expected a demotion, perhaps a dismissal. But the officer's next words shocked me. Commander Thorne was found to have been misled by Clara Volkov regarding the status of his first marriage. The primary charge against him is bigamy, knowingly maintaining 2 households. He has been demoted to the rank of lieutenant and will be transferred to a remote posting. He has been ordered to repay you the full amount of allowances withheld over the years, with interest. The property assigned to him here is being transferred to your name. He is also financially responsible for restitution to all of Cale's victims. I sat down, the news washing over me. It was a victory. It was justice. But it was not the total ruin I had, in my darkest moments, wished for him. A demotion, not a court-martial. A transfer, not a prison cell. Clara had, in the end, taken the fall for the worst of it. I didn't know what promises Marcus had made her in custody, what lies he had spun, but he had somehow convinced her to shield him. "I see," I said, my voice neutral. The officer shifted uncomfortably. "There is one more thing, Comrade Vogel. One of your father's old comrades, General Petrov, would like to introduce you to someone. A Colonel Martin Zhukov. He's taken over Commander Thorne's former post. His wife died in childbirth years ago. He's remained single. After hearing your story, he asked to be introduced. A blind date." The concept was so absurdly normal, so divorced from the battle I had just fought, that I almost laughed. But I saw the gentle concern in the officer's eyes. He and the general weren't just playing matchmaker. They were offering me a path back into the world. A respectable, secure path with a man they vetted and approved. I was too weary to refuse. "Thank you," I said. "I would be honored to meet Colonel Zhukov." Colonel Martin Zhukov was not what I expected. He was a tall, solid man with quiet eyes and a firm handshake. He didn't fill the silence with empty words. He took me to a simple cafe and listened. He asked about Leo. He asked about my father. He didn't ask about Marcus. After a few meetings, I invited him to my small apartment. I cooked a meal, a simple but hearty stew. After we ate, I poured tea, my hands steady. The question that had been burning in me for weeks finally found its voice. "Do you think I was too ruthless?" I asked, looking into my cup. After all, we were husband and wife for 18 years. I completely destroyed his future and still insisted on the divorce. Some people say it's better to tear down 10 temples than break up one marriage. I waited for the platitudes, the gentle chiding, the subtle judgment I had come to expect from a world that prized a woman's silence. Martin was silent for a long moment. Then he looked at me and a small, kind smile touched his lips. "Not at all," he said, his voice low and sure. "I think you're a remarkable woman. You raised a child all by yourself in those harsh conditions. And when you were wronged, you had the courage to stand up for yourself. I deeply admire that kind of woman." He leaned forward slightly. "As soldiers, we can't always be there for our families. It's even more important for our partners to be strong. You're exactly the kind of person I respect." His words were a balm I didn't know I needed. They eased a tension in my heart I had carried for a lifetime. But my life was no longer just my own. Before anything could proceed, I needed Leo's blessing. I decided to send him a telegram the next day. I didn't get the chance. 2 days later, there was a frantic knocking at my door. I opened it to find Leo standing there, dusty and travel-worn, his face set in a stormy scowl. He had gotten leave and taken the first train back. "Where is he?" was all he said. "Leo? What are you?" "Colonel Zhukov. Where is he?" As if on cue, Martin arrived for a prearranged walk. He saw Leo, took in his defiant posture and gave me a small, calm nod. "I have this." The moment Leo laid eyes on him, he lunged. He didn't shout, didn't curse. He just threw a wild, furious punch. Martin, a seasoned regimental commander, didn't flinch. He deflected the blow easily, grabbed Leo's arm and in a fluid motion had him pinned against the wall of the hallway, disarmed and breathing heavily. "Let me go." Leo snarled, struggling. Martin released him, stepping back into a relaxed but ready stance. "Are you done?" he asked calmly. Panting and humiliated, Leo charged again. Martin didn't strike back. He simply sparred with him, deflecting, dodging, using Leo's own momentum against him until my son, exhausted and frustrated, stumbled and collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. That was when Martin smiled, not unkindly. "So," he asked, "am I qualified to be your father now?" Leo looked up from the floor, his chest heaving, his eyes blazing with a defiant determination I knew all too well. "I may not be strong enough now," he gasped. "But I'll keep training. And if I ever find out you mistreated my mom, I swear I won't go easy on you." Hearing that, Martin immediately straightened up. His face grew solemn. He brought his hand up in a crisp, perfect military salute. "Comrade," he said, his voice ringing with absolute sincerity. "You have my word. I will make sure your mother is happy for the rest of her life." It was the only approval that mattered. The wedding was a small, quiet affair in the base chapel. General Petrov gave me away. My son stood as my witness. I wore a simple blue dress. Martin wore his dress uniform. It was a day of quiet joy, a peaceful beginning. As we stood outside, accepting congratulations from a small group of officers and their wives, a familiar, haggard figure approached. Marcus. He was wearing the uniform of a lieutenant, a stark demotion that seemed to shrink him. His eyes were haunted, burning with a mixture of bitterness and desperate envy. He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes and sneered at Martin. "So, this is the great Colonel Zhukov. Doesn't seem like your standards are too high after all. Marrying the woman I threw away." The insult hung in the air for a split second. Martin didn't hesitate. He didn't shout. He simply stepped forward and punched Marcus hard in the face. A short, powerful blow that sent him staggering back, blood trickling from his split lip. "Watch your mouth," Martin snapped, his voice cold as steel. Next time I won't go so easy on you. Marcus, clutching his face, looked from Martin's stony expression to my cold, impassive one. The hope in his eyes died, replaced by a desperate, pathetic greed. Although he'd only been demoted, he knew his career was over. And to avoid a harsher punishment, he'd been forced to sign over half of his remaining assets to Clara. Combined with the back pay he owed me and the restitution to Cale's victims, he was left with nothing. He had grown used to power and privilege, and its absence had broken him. "Ilara," he whined, trying to sound wounded, ignoring the blood on his chin. "I treated you well when we first got married, didn't I? Why didn't you ever tell me your father was a war hero? If you'd just told me from the start, none of this would have happened. This is all your fault." I looked at his pathetic, angry face and a small, cold laugh escaped me. "And how do you think you got into the army in the first place, Marcus? You think it was because of your own stellar abilities?" The small crowd around us fell silent. Marcus's eyes widened. I saw the memory dawn on him. His first application rejected for his poor education. His second mysteriously accepted. "It was my father," I said, my voice clear and carrying. "After you were rejected, he saw you working, trying to improve. He saw a spark of determination. It was he who wrote a recommendation letter for you. In it, he called you the son he never had." I took a step toward him, my gaze unwavering. "But how did you treat his daughter? How did you treat his grandson? Look into your heart and ask yourself, do you really deserve that letter?" Marcus was completely speechless. He stumbled back, his mind reeling. Then the selfishness that was his core nature reasserted itself. "If he helped me once," he muttered almost to himself, "why didn't he help me all the way? If he had kept supporting me, I would have gone even further." His eyes turned red with a sense of entitled anger. "Your father was so good to me. Why did you betray me? Go talk to the higher-ups. Tell them to reinstate me. Do it." He lunged for me, but Martin was there, knocking his hand aside with contemptuous ease. Everyone present looked at Marcus with nothing but pity and disgust. I shook my head, watching the ungrateful wolf I had once loved slink away, defeated by his own bottomless greed. My life with Martin was peaceful. He was a man of few words, but his kindness was in his actions. A roasted chicken brought home after drills, a wildflower picked on a walk, the way he always made sure the fire was lit before I woke. I, once worn down and weathered, began to bloom again. My spirit, my face, my eyes, they came back to life. One evening, Martin came home from a staff meeting, his expression grim. He took my hand. "There's news, Ilara," he said gently. "From the juvenile facility. Cale was killed in a fight." He explained. Cale had continued his bullying ways inside, getting involved in gang conflicts. The group that finally turned on him included some of the very boys he had tormented in the past. They had seized their chance for revenge. I was silent for a long moment. The news was shocking, but it stirred no grief in me. Only a cold, final sense of closure. And Clara? She was told. She didn't take it well. She's been declared mentally unfit. She'll be transferred to a psychiatric ward. I nodded. A life for a life. That's how it was. I never forgot that in another time, another life, it was they who had driven my son to his grave. As for Marcus, he filed for retirement soon after. His reputation was in tatters. I heard he applied for a clerical job in a remote Siberian town, a broken man chasing a ghost of the status he'd lost. None of it had anything to do with me anymore. All I cared about was my small, happy home. The past was finally, truly behind us. And then a few days ago a telegram arrived. It was from Leo, sent from the border region where he was finishing his training. "Met a doctor. Her name is Anya. We are to be married. Stop. She reminds me of you. Stop. Thank you for my future. Stop. You're Leo." I held the paper, reading the words over and over until they blurred. Knowing that he was living a complete and fulfilling life, that he had found love and purpose, the last of the bitterness in my heart finally faded away. In my past life I was a timid, helpless mother. And because of that I lost my son forever. But in this life I had finally given both of us the justice and the future we deserved. The telegram from Leo felt like a final solid click in the lock of my new life. I held the flimsy paper, the words, "Thank you for my future," branded onto my heart. The ghosts of the frozen grave, the taste of poison, the weight of ashes. They didn't vanish, but they lost their power to wound. They became memories, stark and terrible, but finally just memories. Martin found me standing by the window, the telegram pressed to my chest. He didn't ask. He simply came and stood behind me, his hands resting on my shoulders, a solid, warm presence. He had a way of offering comfort without requiring explanation, a quiet understanding that was his greatest gift. "He's getting married," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I know," Martin replied softly. "He sent me a letter to ask for my permission." I told him the only permission that mattered was yours and the young lady's. I turned in his arms and buried my face in his shoulder, not crying, just breathing him in. The simplicity of it, the normalcy, was still a wonder to me. This was what peace felt like. The news about Cale and Clara had settled into the landscape of the past. There was no schadenfreude, only a grim acknowledgement that the seeds they had sown had borne their inevitable bitter fruit. Marcus's fate, a meaningless paper-pushing job in the frozen hinterlands, was a fitting end. He was erased from our story. My work at the publicity department flourished. I found I had a voice, one that resonated with people. I wrote not just about my own experiences but about the quiet heroes, the wives who held families together during long deployments, the children who grew up saluting photographs, the veterans like my father who carried their wounds in silence. My articles, signed Ilara Zhukov, became a respected feature in the military newsletter. I was no longer a victim or a scandal, I was a chronicler. Months turned into a year. Leo's wedding was a joyful, boisterous affair held on the base. Anya, his bride, was indeed like me, practical, intelligent, with a steady gaze that held no nonsense and a warm laugh that lit up her whole face. She was a doctor, her hands capable of both healing and holding. Seeing my son, so tall and confident in his officer's uniform, his eyes full of love and promise as he looked at his wife, was a harvest so rich it made every past hardship worth its price. Martin stood beside me, his chest puffed out with pride as if Leo were his own. And in every way that mattered, he was. After the ceremony, Leo clapped Martin on the shoulder, a gesture of easy camaraderie that spoke volumes. The defensive fury was gone, replaced by respect. "Take care of her," Leo said, nodding toward me. "Always," Martin replied, and that was that. The pact was sealed. Life settled into a rhythm that was both simple and profound. We had a small house on the base with a garden where I grew tomatoes and herbs. Martin's career was steady. My writing was fulfilling. We were happy. It was an ordinary, extraordinary happiness that I never took for granted. One crisp autumn afternoon, a formal envelope arrived from the Office of Veterans Affairs. It was addressed to me. My first thought was of my father. Some final piece of paperwork, perhaps. But it wasn't about the past. It was an invitation. The department was establishing a new liaison committee, comprised of veterans' family members, to advise on support systems, benefits, and outreach. They were asking me, as the daughter of Armin Vogel and a prominent voice for military families, to serve as the committee's founding chairwoman. I showed the letter to Martin that evening. He read it, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Well," he said, looking at me with immense pride. "Chairwoman Zhukov. It has a nice ring to it." I was nervous. This was different from writing articles. This was responsibility. This was action. The first meeting was held in a bright conference room at headquarters. Around the table sat a diverse group: elderly parents of fallen soldiers, young spouses, adult children of veterans. Their faces were etched with stories of sacrifice, worry, and resilience. I saw my own past struggles reflected in their eyes. I took my seat at the head of the table, my heart pounding. I introduced myself not as a writer but as a daughter and a mother. I told them about my father's medals hidden away in a trunk. I told them about the locked door and the cold night. I told them about the importance of being seen. "We are not just supporting characters in their stories," I said, my voice finding its strength. "We have our own stories, our own sacrifices. This committee will be our voice. We will ensure that no family is left in the cold. No child's future is stolen for lack of an advocate. No veteran's legacy is forgotten." The room was silent for a moment, and then a slow, firm applause began. It wasn't loud or celebratory. It was determined. It was an agreement. The work was hard. There was bureaucracy to navigate, budgets to argue for, entrenched attitudes to challenge. But for the first time I was wielding my past not as a weapon of destruction, but as a tool for building. My father's name, once a hidden shield, was now a standard to rally under. My own experiences were a blueprint for what needed to change. We established a system to check on the families of deployed soldiers. We created a fund to help with educational costs for veterans' children. We started a program to record the oral histories of older veterans, preserving their stories before they were lost. One day, I was reviewing a draft of our new outreach pamphlet when my assistant told me I had a visitor. A woman was waiting in the lobby. She was older than me, her face lined with a grief that was both old and fresh. She wore a simple worn coat and clutched a handbag tightly in her lap. She stood up as I approached, her eyes nervous. "Comrade Zhukov?" she asked hesitantly. "Yes. How can I help you?" I read your article. The one about your father. And the medals." Her voice trembled. "My husband, he was at the bridge. The one your father held. He was one of the civilians your father saved." The air left my lungs. I reached out and guided her to a chair. "Please sit." Her name was Irina. Her husband had been a young teacher evacuating with his students when their convoy was targeted. My father's unit had been their only hope. "He never talked about it much," Irina said, her eyes distant. "The horror of it was too much. But he always said a giant of a man with a voice like thunder herded them to safety, standing between them and the fire until the last truck was across. He never knew his name. Until I read your article." She looked at me, tears welling in her eyes. "I just wanted to thank you. And to thank him. My husband lived a long, good life. He had children and grandchildren. He was a wonderful teacher. None of that would have happened without your father's sacrifice." She opened her handbag and took out a small, faded photograph of a young man surrounded by laughing children. "This was him. This was the life your father gave him." I took the photograph, my hands shaking. I saw the joy in the man's face, the hope in the children's eyes. It was a life. A whole, beautiful life that existed because of my father's courage. It was a ripple effect of goodness I had never considered. I thought of Marcus, of his bitter words. If he helped me once, why didn't he help me all the way? He had never understood. The help wasn't the point. The point was the opportunity. The chance at a life. My father had given that to Marcus, and Marcus had squandered it. But he had given it to this man, this teacher, and it had been cherished, multiplied, passed on. Irina's visit was a gift. It closed a circle I didn't know was open. My father's silence hadn't been a waste. His legacy wasn't just in the medals in my drawer. It was in the classrooms of children taught by a man he'd saved, in the families of the soldiers he'd led, and now in the work I was doing. That evening I went to the trunk and took out the medals. I didn't hide them away. I had a small glass-fronted shadow box made. I mounted them inside with a simple engraved plate below. Armin Vogel. Courage is quiet. I hung it on the wall in our living room where the light would catch the bronze. It was no longer a secret or a weapon. It was a reminder. A blessing. Martin came home and saw it. He didn't say anything. He just walked over, put his arm around me and kissed my temple. Winter came again, but the cold held no terror for me now. One evening, Martin built a roaring fire and we sat together on the sofa, watching the flames dance. I was working on a speech for the committee, my head resting on his shoulder. "You've built something remarkable, you know," he said quietly, his voice rumbling against my ear. "We built it," I corrected softly. "No," he said. "You planted the seeds a long time ago. I just got to watch them grow." I thought about that. I thought about the seeds of despair I had sown in my first life, the ones that had led only to a grave. I thought about the seeds of fury I had planted upon my return, the ones that had burned down the old world to make room for the new. And now I was planting seeds of a different kind, seeds of support, of memory, of justice. The harvest this time was not one of revenge but of peace. It was a quieter, more enduring satisfaction. The fire crackled and the wind whistled outside, but inside all was warm and still. I had my home. I had my husband. I had my son living his own life, building his own future, free from the shadows of the past. I had navigated the river of time, not as a passive leaf swept along by the current, but as the captain of my own ship. I had reached the far shore. I closed my eyes, listening to the steady beat of Martin's heart. There were no more battles to fight. Only a life to live. And it was enough. It was more than enough. was everything. The end.